All right, let's see. What are we doing? Oh, Ron Paul. Man, I haven't talked about Ron Paul in years and years. And I was at a conference, I was somewhere, and somebody mentioned Ron Paul and his support for Maduro in Venezuela. And I said, no, he doesn't support Maduro. I said, yeah, he really does support Maduro. And I said, okay, well, I have to look into this. So I came back and I looked into it. And of course, he does support Maduro. And so in 2012, when he ran for president, I was hugely anti-Ron Paul. I mean, I was really, really anti-Ron Paul. And I got harassed for, being anti-Ron Paul. Ron Paul was like the savior. He was anti the Fed. He was pro-liberty. He was pro-freedom. How could I be against him? He was going to save the Republican Party. He was the best, by far, the best candidate the Republicans had ever had for president. He had the most integrity. He was just the best guy ever. And a lot of people, just like today with Trump, a lot of people kind of brushed me off. Although with Trump, it's like 1,000 times worse. A lot of people call themselves objectivists. And people who were libertarian and so on just brushed me off and attacked me. And it was pretty brutal in those days, just like it's brutal now with Trump. In those days, it was the Ron Paul thing. And I stuck to my guns, as I usually do. And I'm usually right about these things. And, I was right then. And time has just proven me more right than even I expected. So, why was I opposed to Ron Paul back then? Well, because I thought he was thoroughly anti-American. I thought that anybody who blamed 9/11 on basically U.S. foreign policy had no clue about foreign policy and was basically a hater of America. In all of his speeches, I got this tinge of support for the anarchist wing of the libertarian movement, kind of the Murray Rothbard wing, which I despise. And so he smacked of again, I think the Murray Rothbard in particular, and of this anti-Americanism, hatred of America above all, right? And I thought that his talks on every time he mentioned Wall Street, there was this sneering and hatred for bankers and a almost implied anti-Semitism in there. Could never really catch him on it, but it was like, it was just borderline, those evil bankers. It was just there implicit. And I didn't trust him. And of course, on foreign policy, I thought it was horrific. And he was against any American intervention. Of course, the supporters said, "Oh no, he's for defending he's for, if America's attacked, he's for self-defense." And I said, no way, he's not for self-defense, because he's not just hates the state, he hates the American state more than all other states. And people said, no, you don't know what you're talking about, Yaron. Anyway, so I looked up this Maduro stuff. And once he ran for president in 2012, and it did pretty well for a crazy guy. And then he retired from politics, and he founded the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, right? Peace and prosperity. And so I looked up. I said, he can't really support this. Somebody says, why do Jews love playing everybody I disagree with as an anti-Semitic? Because so many people are anti-Semitic. Ron Paul has I didn't say he was an anti-Semitic, but there's an implicit hatred of bankers and an implicit kind of blame that sounded anti-Semitic to me. And the more I read of Ron Paul, the more I think he probably is. And the von Mises Institute and many of those people back there, I think there is a bit of the anti-Semitic thing. And look, there are a lot of anti-Semites in the world. And if you don't believe me, just go, listen to Nick Fuentes or look at the history. Look at what Look at what the Nazis did. Or is that a mythology as well? Is that a conspiracy theory? We made that up. Yeah, von Mises was Jewish, but everybody else at the Mises Institute is not. And they have distorted and perverted his philosophy, his ideas, his economics to suit a completely different political, philosophical agenda that I think von Mises would be horrified by. Von Mises also wasn't an anarchist. Von Mises also didn't, again, implicitly support the South. Not implicitly. These guys explicitly support the South. So, all right. By the way, if you want an answer on USS Liberty, just use the Super Chat feature. I'd be happy to answer that. That's to one of the guys in the chat. So I looked him up, and not only did I find stuff on Maduro that is just unbelievable, but North Korea, Hong Kong, Iran, all pop up because they spend a lot of time at the Ron Paul Institute discussing these kind of, they spend a lot of time discussing foreign policy issues. And it is truly, truly disgusting, offensive once you start reading this stuff. It's truly unbelievable. I mean, Maduro is described as, just a democratically elected president of Venezuela. He's no dictator. There's no corruption in the elections. Chavez was just a democratically elected president. And indeed, I mean, the Ron Paul Institute could be titled the Ron Paul / Noam Chomsky Institute. This is where the communist anarchists of Noam Chomsky and the Ron Paul anarchists are basically the same. And I guess that should surprise me, but it surprises me because people still support these people. So it's not that socialism has starved the Venezuelan people. No. Absolutely not. Chavez and Maduro are democratically elected leaders of a country that's tried to stand up to the United States, try to be independent. And yeah, maybe they didn't implement the libertarian policies of von Mises, very well. But that's not what's starving Venezuela. No. I mean, Venezuela would be fine today. Venezuela would be thriving today, if not for U.S. sanctions. Straight out of the leftist playbook. Straight out of Noam Chomsky. The only reason, and what's his name, Michael Moore, the only reason Venezuela is struggling today economically, the only reason Venezuela is poor, is because of the United States. Right? I mean, and the reason the United States is doing this is we want the oil. We want the oil. It's U.S. oil companies that are behind U.S. policy, which is basically starving the Venezuelan people. It's all about the opposition, and I'm quoting from their article. The opposition to Maduro inside Venezuela comes from the elites who have been traditionally allied with Washington in the looting of the country. That's when they were rich, is when I guess they were looting the country for the U.S. And now that Chavez and Maduro have made them poor, there's nothing to loot. These corrupt elites, the article goes on, with the CIA's help, no reference, temporarily overthrew Chavez in the past, but the people in the Venezuelan military secured his release and returned the presidency. I mean, Chavez is a hero. I mean, I'd be surprised if they don't consider Che Guevara and Fidel Castro heroes at the Ron Paul Institute. I mean, the guy who tried to steal the elections in Bolivia, right, was recently kicked out of the country by a popular revolution. The Ron Paul Institute claimed it was a CIA coup. Conspiracy theories up the wazoo, but one consistent thing throughout the entire throughout the entire episode, throughout the entire publications. It's always the U.S.'s fault. It's always the U.S. that it's evil. It's always the U.S. scheming behind. Right? Ortega, who has just basically become the dictator of Nicaragua, is, again, he stands up to the U.S., so therefore, according to Ron Paul, he's a hero. The real evil in the world is the United States government. The real evil of the world is America, according to the Ron Paul Institute. This guy is as anti-American as Noam Chomsky. And of course, many libertarians love Noam Chomsky. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Ron Paul Institute considered Noam Chomsky a hero. So I said, okay, well, that's the view of Maduro, right? It's the view of he's the Democratic elected. He's a good guy. He's trying to establish sovereignty. By the way, according to Ron Paul Institute, in spite of the anarchist influences, the most important thing in the world is sovereignty. Sovereignty other than U.S. sovereignty. Right? Other than U.S. sovereignty, the most important thing in the world is sovereignty. And sovereignty as opposed to U.S. influence, which is considered the essence of evil. So what about North Korea? Well, here's a title from one of the articles at the Institute. Why I hope Maduro wins, that's Venezuela, he wins, Venezuela's continued to starve, the socialism continues to flourish in Venezuela, right? Maduro wins, and North Korea keeps its nukes. See, North Korea is just trying to protect itself from evil America by having the nukes. And anything that holds America at bay is good, and maybe having a North Korea with some nukes to offset the influence of America, maybe that's what's necessary in order to be peace and prosperity, which is what the Ron Paul Institute is all about. And of course, why are people in North Korea starving? Well, not because of socialism. No. Yaron, you're just a simpleton. It's not socialism that starves people. It's not authoritarianism that starves people. It's not dictators that starve people. What starves people is America. It's American sanctions. American sanctions are responsible for North Korea's poverty, for North Korea's starvation. This is the Ron Paul Institute. This is not me making this up. You can go and search and find the articles. Right? And what's the most important is to support the sovereign right of the people of Venezuela or anybody else to shape their nation in accordance with their will. You know that Murray Rothbard celebrated when North Vietnam overtook South Vietnam and established communism throughout the Vietnam Peninsula, throughout the Vietnam state. Why? North Vietnam was communist. You'd think that was the opposite of what Rothbard was against. The opposite of what he was for. That you would think that somebody like Murray Rothbard, who claimed to be a capitalist, would be violently opposed to the imposition of communism over the South Vietnamese. No, he said. It's the will of the people. The will of the people. The only place in the world where Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul and their lackeys, the only place in the world where they believe that the will of the people is irrelevant is the United States. The United States, for Rothbard and for Ron Paul and for the Mises Institute, is the epitome of evil. I mean, they are supporting North Korea. They say, you know, what we should do with North Korea is leave them alone, stop sanctioning them, stop threatening them as if we're threatening them, right? And the way to help the Venezuela is to end the sanctions, which are starving them, not socialism, remember. And the most important thing we can do is respect the nation's sovereignty. Now, let me say something about sovereignty. I've said this in other talks in the past. A dictator a country run by a dictator is not a sovereign country. A country that violates individual rights through and through is not a sovereign country. North Korea is not a sovereign country. Venezuela today is not a sovereign country. Iran is not a sovereign country. Ayn Rand talked about this. You have every right to invade a dictatorship. It doesn't mean you should. You have to make sure it's in your interest. You have to be egoistic about it. But dictatorships do not have sovereignty. You don't have sovereignty if you're en masse violating rights. There is no right to violate rights. There's no sovereignty comes from the people in the sense that sovereignty comes from protecting the people's rights, from doing the function of government, not from just having power and control. Now you think, again, this is again why I'm so opposed to libertarianism. You'd think libertarians would get this, but not this brand of libertarians. And again, the hatred towards America, American empire they call it, that is just unbelievable. And then it reaches a height of evil in my book is when they talk about Hong Kong. You know, the demonstrations, really a semi-revolution going on in Hong Kong, where the Hong Kong people are basically declaring that they do not want increased Chinese influence. They do not want authoritarian Chinese in Hong Kong. And they're going to the streets and they're fighting the police with the idea of getting rid of that extradition law, which was evil, and the imposition of Chinese law on Hong Kong. And they're fighting to get the ability to vote for the chief administrator of the Hong Kong territory, not just for candidates China approves of, but to vote, have a real vote, not just a fake vote that the Chinese approve of. And they're fighting left and right for this, and in my view, unbelievably heroic. And I want to read you some of the headlines in the Ron Paul Institute's articles about the Hong Kong, right? Here it goes. The U.S. stunt in Hong Kong will make other issues more difficult. Stunt, it's a U.S. stunt. It's not Hong Kong residents fighting this off. Hands off Hong Kong. Violent protests in Hong Kong reached their last stage. This was in August. Doesn't look like it's the last stage. And notice the violent protests. Not the violent oppression of the protests by the police, the violent protests. Violent color revolution in Hong Kong fails despite strong New York Times support, I guess. Behind a made-for-TV Hong Kong protest narrative. I mean, just basically, Ron Paul is taking on the view that the whole protest in Hong Kong a U.S. CIA conspiracy. And his view is that China has a right to Hong Kong. This is how they write about it, right? First, he says, the protests opposed the extradition bill as a wider means of opposing Hong Kong's continued integration with China. That's all true. Arguing that the one country, two system term imposed by the British upon Hong Kong return under Chinese sovereignty in 1997 must be upheld. But Ron Paul doesn't believe in one country, two systems. He wants Chinese authoritarianism over Hong Kong. It's their right, he says. I mean, it is mind-boggling that somebody who stands for libertarianism, supposedly liberty, advocates for the exact opposite of liberty, advocates for an authoritarian regime and the imposition of authoritarianism onto new people who are free right now. He says, they write here, The story of Hong Kong is one of territory violently seized by the British Empire from China in 1841, being controlled as a colony for nearly 150 years, and begrudgingly handed over to China in 1997. That's the story of Hong Kong, not the story of freedom. Who cares who controls Hong Kong if the people there are free? It is so horrific and evil. I mean, truly evil. He doesn't care about individuals. I mean, this is pure collectivism. Pure collectivism. Hong Kong belongs to China. And since it belongs to China, whatever China does with it is fine. And if they want to violate people's rights, that's fine. And God forbid if UK happens to occupy it and bring them freedom and get them to become rich, well, that's illegitimate, because who are the British to give freedom to the Chinese? Today, they write, the Anglo-American International Order is fading, with China now the second largest economy on earth and poised to overtake the US at any time. I mean, with relish they write this. With economic and military power now on China's side, it has incrementally uprooted the vestiges of British colonial influence in Hong Kong. What are those vestiges? What have they uprooted? Freedom, capitalism, property rights, rule of law. But to hell with those. What's important is that Hong Kong not be influenced by America and its evil ally, the United Kingdom. And then they go on to it. Hong Kong's elected government is now composed by a majority of openly pro-Beijing, again, democracy. Hong Kong people voted for pro-Beijing people. Therefore, it's okay for pro-Beijing people to violate the rights of individuals. Now, what's fascinating about that last paragraph, this was written in July or something, or June or July, is that since then, there have been elections in Hong Kong just last week. And the citizens of Hong Kong voted overwhelmingly, in unprecedented numbers, for the opposition. They basically kicked out all the pro-Beijing parties and politicians. So that portion of the Hong Kong electorate, which doesn't have, of the Hong Kong political bodies, that don't have a lot of political power, those portions are now overwhelmingly ruled by the opposition. So I wonder if the Ron Paul Institute will now change its tune about Hong Kong now that the people have spoken. Or they'll say, which is likely, that the people have spoken because the CIA has been bribing them, handing out money to get them to elect, and it's really election fraud, all instigated by the United States. I mean, they are pro the extradition bill. It's just, yeah, I don't want to even go on with this. I don't want to give them too much time. But, you know, people ask me why I'm against it, why I don't call myself a libertarian. That's why. Because that is as bad as any wacky leftists. That's as bad as Noam Chomsky. That's as bad as Bernie Sanders. That's as bad as AOC. I mean, it is truly nuts and evil. Nuts is too good, because that assumes, you know, they're crazy. They're not crazy. They're just damn evil. They don't care about individuals. They don't care about liberty. They don't care about freedom. What drives them is a hatred of the U.S. What drives them is international collectivism. The collectivism, the sovereignty, the rights of every country other than the U.S. and the people influenced by the U.S., because the U.S. has been such a horribly influential country, according to them, in the world. So I despised Ron Paul in 2012. I despise him more today. And anybody affiliated with him, associated with him, I think it's counter to everything we stand for in objectivism. This is just the politics. I'm not even talking about the fact that he's religious and the fact that he's creepy on other issues. I'm just talking about politics. Politically, we're opposed to everything Ron Paul stands for. And as such, how can I be a libertarian and share a tent with him? I'm not in the same universe as Ron Paul. I'm not on the same political spectrum as Ron Paul. Ron Paul is he's a unbelievable collectivist. If the spectrum is individualism versus collectivism, Ron Paul is a collectivist. Right there with Noam Chomsky and Donald Trump. And I won't have anything to do with any of those people. All right. We have got a bunch of super chat questions. Let me try to get ones that are relevant to this. What are your detailed arguments against Hoppe? Hoppe is an ANCAP student of Rothbard, pro-medieval feudalism, alt-right, and conspiracies. There you go. My detailed arguments against Hoppe are my detailed arguments against ANCAP. ANCAP is a contradiction in term. You cannot be an anarchist and a capitalist. You have to choose one or the other. Capitalism requires government. It's not a necessary evil. It's a necessary good that is required in order to have capitalism. You have to have the rule of law to have capitalism. You have to have property rights to have capitalism. You have to have the recognition of individual rights under capitalism. You cannot have any of that under anarchism. So I'm opposed to his ANCAP. I'm opposed to everything that is Rothbard. He's pro-medieval feudalism, which is just the epitome of barbarism, in my view. I mean, medieval was a barbaric, horrible period of time. And anybody who supports it, and a lot of libertarians think that feudalism was wonderful. I mean, yeah, life was short, miserable. Poverty was, everybody was poor. It was just a horrible, disgusting period of time to be alive. So anybody who would glorify medieval feudalism is an enemy of liberty, an enemy of humankind, an enemy of progress, an enemy of technology, an enemy of capitalism. There is nothing good about medieval feudalism. Nothing good came out of medieval feudalism. The great art was when medieval feudalism started to disappear under the Renaissance. The great progress materially came under the disappearance of medieval feudalism, the actual creation of the state, and the Enlightenment. Yeah, David Friedman's the same thing. He likes the anarchy in Iceland, where people slaughtered each other left and right because there was no central government, there were no laws, there was no legal system, there was no rule of law, so everybody killed everybody all the time. So that whole version of libertarianism, which unfortunately is fairly dominant, that Ron Paul exemplifies, and the Hoppe and Rothbard and to some extent David Friedman, is just it's nuts, and it's wrong, it's evil, it's collectivist, it's statist, it's anti-individualist, it's anti-freedom, and you see the consequences in Ron Paul's foreign policy. It's the necessary implication of what they believe. I mean, America is the most evil state ever because it's a success. And what was the last one? Alt-right. Yeah, I mean, alt-right he's a racist. Hoppe is a racist and a conspiracy theorist. And again, you know my views on conspiracy theories and on alt-right. And if you don't, I've done shows dedicated to conspiracy theories, and I've done shows on the alt-right. I'll be doing another show soon on the alt-right because it has a new spin. Now the alt-right is going after everybody who's not to the right, according to their definition, of Donald Trump, including Donald Trump himself, his son, Charlie Cook, the huge supporter of Donald Trump, Ben Shapiro. They're going after them viciously, and I'll talk about that in one of the shows. So Hoppe, on almost every issue, I am opposed to, I despise, I think is wrong. And again, that whole version of libertarianism, in my view, is out. Out. It's anti-liberty. It's anti-freedom. It's anti-individualism.
right.
You demonstrate it in human terms in your novel Atlas Shrugged. And let me start by quoting from a review of this novel Atlas Shrugged that appeared in Newsweek. It said that you are out to destroy almost every edifice in the contemporary American way of life, our Judeo-Christian religion, our modified government-regulated capitalism, our rule by the majority will. Other reviews have said that you scorn churches and the concept of God. Are these accurate criticisms?
Yes, I agree with the facts, but not the estimate of this criticism. Namely, if I am challenging the base of all these institutions, I'm challenging the moral code of altruism, the precept that man's moral duty is to live for others, that man must sacrifice himself to others, which is the present-day morality.
What do you mean by sacrifice himself for others? Now we're getting to the point.
One moment. Since I'm challenging the base, I necessarily would challenge the institutions you named, which are a result of that morality.
All right.
And now what is self-sacrifice?
Yes, what is self-sacrifice? You say that you do not like the altruism by which we live. You like a certain kind of Ayn Randist selfishness.
I would say that I don't like is too weak a word. I consider it evil. And self-sacrifice is the precept that man needs to serve others in order to justify his existence, that his moral duty is to serve others. That is what most people believe today.
Well, yes, we're taught to feel concerned for our fellow man, to feel responsible for his welfare, to feel that we are, as religious people might put it, children under God and responsible one for the other. Now, why do you rebel? What's wrong with this philosophy?
But that is what, in fact, makes man a sacrificial animal. That man must work for others, concern himself with others, or be responsible for them. That is the role of a sacrificial object. I say that man is entitled to his own happiness and that he must achieve it himself, but that he cannot demand that others give up their lives to make him happy. And nor should he wish to sacrifice himself for the happiness of others. I hold that man should have self-esteem.
Using the super chat, and I noticed yesterday when I appealed for support for the show, many of you stepped forward and actually supported the show for the first time. So I'll do it again. Maybe we'll get some more today. If you like what you're hearing, if you appreciate what I'm doing, then I appreciate your support. Those of you who don't yet support the show, please take this opportunity. Go to yaronbrookshow.com/support or go to subscribestar.com, Yaron Brook Show, and make a kind of a monthly contribution to keep this going. I'm not sure when the next